Good evening, and welcome to After Dinner Conversations. My name is Larry Abel. I serve as the National Chairman of the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route Association. Because of the limited time restrictions tonight, we will move promptly to the program with a brief setting for the evening. A struggling America was fortunate to receive the support of France with treaties signed in 1778. The impact of that support was most evident July 11th, 1780, when General Rochambeau, with an army of 450 officers and 4,500 men, sailed into Newport, Rhode Island. Rochambeau and General Washington and his Continental Army thus began a 680-mile troop movement to Yorktown, Virginia. This was a movement that took over 14 months and was the largest movement in the world at that time. The culmination of that movement and campaign was the siege of Yorktown and a resounding victory. The French Lauzun's Legion was a vital component of that campaign at Yorktown and is the subject of the presentation for tonight. During the presentation, you will view some captivating slides which capture events along the trail. These slides were developed from paintings created by historic artist David Wagner. France awarded David Wagner the French National Order of Merit for his fine works, a most prestigious award, and we're proud to have him as part of our organization. With that brief background information, we will move directly into the program. I would like to introduce to you the mediator for tonight, Dr. James Johnson. He is currently the Executive Director of the Hudson River Valley Institute at Morris College, and I hope you will take the time to read his extraordinary background that is presented to you separately. It's appropriate for me to point out at this point that Jim, as we know him, has been involved in W3R since the very first organizational meeting in 1999. He was the first W3R executive director, a longtime friend and supporter of W3R. I now present to you Dr. James Johnson.
Bonsoir, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Red Wall from 1757. Its uniform was British red coats, a carryover from its Jacobite origins, with the black facing indicating the regiment. As part of the regiment colored itself in glory at the Battle of Fontenay in 1795.
All right, that sounded a little scratchy, I know. That came from the 18th century. You can tell that I really have great acting skills, but that really wasn't me. That was my neighbor, an authentic Irish American from County Kerry, where he was born, who did the recording. Thanks to Tommy Beasley. So welcome. So Julie had tasked us tonight to be a little on the light side, thus that recording from Tommy Beasley. So I wanted to share a little humor. Now, to us, this might be humorous. To the people that were doing these activities might not have thought it was quite so funny, but all of these three images are from our official painter. You've already heard about him for W3R, David Wagner. We have the Bumpus collection of paintings from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, a few of each from each state in the Hudson River Valley Institute. courtesy of Dr. Frank T. Bumpus, who endowed my Bumpus Chair in Hudson River Valley history. So in this first painting, you see Chef Henri Soufflet trying to find a giant bullfrog that allegedly kept this spring clean because the French officers needed frog's legs. So unfortunately, that bullfrog, which disappeared, gave its life in the service of King Louis XVI. This is a mishap that took place in Rice City, Rhode Island. You can see that the French army supplied the locals with biscuits, bread, and I'm sure that made them very popular. And what's interesting about this is this place is now called Biscuit Hill on Biscuit Hill Road. Now this is quite an interesting scene from Westchester County. The sheriff decided to arrest Rochambeau as he and his army were marching to Boston. He said his soldiers were stealing wood without authorization. The general allegedly refused to accept the warrant. Surrounded by over 4,000 French troops, the general said, "Take me if you can." So once again, the humor is dedicated to Julie Diddell. Now to introductions. You already read the main introductions. You can read those again if you would like. Our special lineup tonight has the historian of the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route and a descendant of one of the legionnaires of Lauzun's Legion, Charles Dupont. As you know, Dr. Selig is the official historian of the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route and is the project historian for the National Park Service. Fellow W3, and he's with us from Michigan. Fellow W3R member, Mr. Robert Capps, is joining us from Lee's Summit, Missouri. You can see that W3R now branches all over the country. His ancestor, you'll hear a lot about, Charles Dupont, is one of his 39 patriot ancestors. And he's been doing genealogy for 55 years, having retired from business in a career of information technology, marketing, and customer service. So to start this conversation, Dr. Bob Selig, what made the Legion special as an organization? Basically, I would like for you to tell us about this band of brigands, these people that had an unruly reputation. So what about this Lauzun Legion?
Well, good evening, and thank you all for joining us. I hope you had poured yourself your favorite drink. I poured mine in my official W3R mug here, and it's gin and tonic. The gin's got to kill something, and the quinine in the tonic water fights malaria, which is rampant here along the shores of Lake Michigan. Which brings me then to answer your question, Jim. Thank you for asking. Well, what makes the Lauzun's Legion a special organization, a special group? Well, first of all, it's a joint arms unit. We have cavalry, we have artillery, we have infantry, rather than and they're all together in one group rather than each in separate units. It's also a foreign legion, Estrangers. But in the terms of the 18th century, that means they're foreign because they don't speak French. In this case, they speak German among the hussars and the infantry, and probably French among the artillery, which is not surprising in the French army because we have German-speaking regiments, we have an Italian regiment, some of the Dillons. The colonel is wearing a Dillon's uniform, probably at least swore in Irish still. What also makes it different is that it has a very short-term existence. It's a unit that's thrown together in March of 1780 and for the American campaign, and is then disbanded again in the fall of 1783. It's different because when you look at the pictures here, their uniforms clearly betray their Hungarian background, the Hungarian origins, and even though there are very few ethnic Hungarians left, even by the 1780s, they at least swear in Hungarian until the end of the Napoleonic Wars, probably. they're different when you look at the uniforms, or certainly when you look at this painting by David Wagner. They have lances, which is uncommon at that time in the French army. Within the Hussars, it looks like, based on what I found, is that the Duc de Lauzun has organized a lifeguard for himself of about 35 troopers, and the other ones were actually other ones with the lances. The other, 250, 280 of them do not have lances, and they also do not have these very special hat, Busby hat. What it also makes it special, that's the only unit that I know that has more men executed for various offenses than get killed in battle. The score is 6-5.
So Bob, does that say anything about the origin of the definition of the word hussar?
Well, some of their behavior certainly along the route, they live up to their reputation. Hussar, this Hungarian word, really means somebody who robs and steals, and that's the reason probably why they don't have pockets in their pants, because the difference between yours and mine seems to be rather fluent. On the other hand, if you look at certainly the reenactor, whom some of you may know, the Hussars, there's that saying that the Hussars are the only ones who can empty a village just by riding up to it. The men run away from them and the women run towards them. It's certainly a very, very good-looking uniform that they have. And yes, they do live up to the name of and their background from the border wars with the Turks.
So here we have the Duc de Lauzun. Why did King Louis XVI appoint him? Eventually, this guy's going to lose his head.
Well, he appoints him primarily because Rochambeau does need some light troops for the American campaign, and he only has infantry and artillery. And the Duc de Lauzun is already commanding officer of 3 legions, or some 3 light troops. And when the question comes up, this Lauzun's legion is very quickly created for him, because here's somebody who wants to go to America. Here's somebody who has funds to equip the troops, and here's somebody obviously with connections at court. He's the right man at the right place at the right time. He's married, but he doesn't live together with his wife, so he's actually free to go to America when the time comes on very short notice.
Well, he's a very interesting guy. I know you'll tell us about his ending when we get towards the end of this presentation. Thanks, Bob. Bob Capps, you've got a lot of experience with miniatures. You've done research, genealogical research of your ancestor and many others. So what can you tell me about your ancestor, Charles DuPas?
Well, my great-great-grandfather, Charles DuPas, was an extraordinary character. He enlisted at 25 years of age on July 15th, 1779, in the French Army, the 2nd Squad of Hussars. He was 5'10" with blue eyes, brown hair, had smallpox scars, and he spent the summer and fall of 1779 in Brittany, in the west of France, training and preparing for a cross-channel attack on England. So him, along with the others, were some pretty tough guys, and they were preparing to cross the channel and kill Englishmen at that point. However, this plan was changed on February 2nd of 1780, and it was decided to ferry the ground forces to North America. This slide is from a few pieces from my pike collection. I collect those, and so you might find those on a lance. These are American pikes. The top 3, one of those is actually from the Fishkill Depot, and the bottom one is from the ship Liberty that was at the Battle of Valcourt. And with those, you could put the pikes on top of a piece of wood or a pole, and they included an iron butt cone for thrusting into the ground to help brace them if at an angle against a charge by horsemen. The pike was inexpensive to make, and a pole could be cut from any tree. Charles DePaul was born March 23rd, 1754 in Ghent, Flanders. At the time of his birth, this area of Flanders was occupied by France in 1745, and the churches were Catholic. They spoke Dutch and French, no English. Charles's mother died in 1755, shortly after the birth of twins, John and Maria. And his father and paternal grandfather raised the three children. Charles's father and grandfather were members of the Wine Schroeders Guild and also wine merchants. They transported the wine from the wine cellar to the customer, and this guild also had a monopoly unloading liquids such as wine, beer, honey from ships arriving from France and Germany. On May 31st and June 14th, 1767, there was a parade in Ghent to honor Saint Macarius, who the Catholics believe protected them from the plague. The guild sponsored a float, and several of the DePaul children were on that float, and Charles is depicted as the barrel maker in the front. On July 11th, 1780, Rochambeau was at Newport and went ashore. And this is a print on my office wall of the arrival by David Wagner. And it shows the troops standing several ranks deep on each side and on the way to the colony. This was, I believe, the first time that George Washington actually inspected those troops.
I think we see a hussar over to the right.
Right, up in the right corner of in the blue. This is actually one of my favorite prints from David Wagner, and it's called Sabre au Clair, and it was October 3rd, 1781 at the Battle of Hook, close to Virginia. Or not Virginia, close to across from Yorktown in Gloucester, Virginia. There's consensus that the Lauzun's Legion had 13 casualties and 10 wounded at the battle, virtually identical to the British losses. And my family history has it that Charles DePaul was wounded during this engagement. Next.
All right, so one of your great hobbies is collecting miniatures.
Yes, this is for this event. I began to pull soldiers out of my cabinets, and so this represents Yorktown and the battle there. But it has on the. What's interesting is on the. This is from most of these are from King and Country toy soldiers. And on the left, the British have the Scottish there. They have the Hessians there. Not as necessarily at the event, but I have those troops, and so I include them there. And then on the other side, the Americans, of course, had the French. Okay. And this represents the French infantry that were there. Actually, the fourth one from the left is Rochambeau. And of course, there's the French flag, and these were the infantry that were there. Next, please. And this, in the background, you'll see the spikes and the hill there. That represents redoubt number 10 at Yorktown. And I just use that as a background to show you what Lauzun's Legion looks like. Those are a few of the soldiers I have currently.
So I think what's interesting about your ancestor, I had an ancestor who, a Hessian, so in a similar circumstance, Charles DePaul decided not to go home, but he deserted and stayed in America. So what can you tell us about him and his life in Kentucky?
Okay, between April 1st to September 1st of 1782, 35 men deserted the Legion and did not return to France. On May 30th, 1782, Charles DePaul, after close to 3 years of service in the French Army, deserted and started his new life in the United States. And to my knowledge, he never went home. In a letter, he later stated that he did not know English when he came to Kentucky in 1782. DePaul was very successful and established a store and trade business on Novlick Road in the northwest part of Lincoln County, Kentucky. Part of the business was buying local products and shipping these products down the Mississippi River by way of Kentucky and Ohio rivers to New Orleans. So if you can imagine that, that was probably a treacherous thing. And I know early on you made at least 8 trips going down there and taking supplies down there. And there were Frenchmen down there, and Spain was in control of the area. When he returned to Kentucky, he would do that by sailing to New Orleans, to Philadelphia, and then overland to Fort Pitt and down the Ohio River to Kentucky. On his return trip, he would bring goods from Philadelphia to sell in Kentucky. So this wasn't, this was a wild area at that time. There included Native Americans, and so it was quite a treacherous trip making that and doing that around that time. And there were no antibiotics either. So.
Well, and I know that he had a very adventurous life. He tried to overthrow the Spanish government in Louisiana. He served with George Rogers Clark and was even in the War of 1812. You really have learned a lot about your ancestor.
Right. Thank you. Even though Charles left the French Army, he was in contact with the French ambassador to the United States. And on April 20th, 1793, DePaul attended a dinner and soon thereafter became involved in a French plot to overthrow the Spanish government in Louisiana. It appears to be a plot originated by Charles, and he would provide maps and supplies for the venture and would use the General George Rogers Clark. So the plot included General Clark, the French, and Charles DePaul. General George Rogers Clark of Vincennes fame was offered the command of the expedition and accepted a commission as Major General in the armies of France and Commander-in-Chief of the Revolutionary Legions on the Mississippi. He issued proposals for volunteers for the reduction of the Spanish forts on the Mississippi, opening the trade of that river and giving freedom to the Spanish along its borders. Besides regular pay, the French officers and soldiers, those who would enlist, were offered large land grants. There's a series of letters documenting the plot, and the letters involved President Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Kentucky Governor Shelby, the first governor of Kentucky, and Charles DePaul. So Charles apparently was well known to the Spanish authorities who had complained to Washington, and they were all aware, and there was a series of letters that went back and forth urging Governor Shelby to stop him from going out and taking arms and going down the Mississippi. However, in one of the letters, Shelby replied to Thomas Jefferson that he didn't believe he had the authority to do that, and that men come and go across the frontier and they take arms with them. And besides that, Charles was a friend of his. So the French Revolution recalled the French ambassador Jeanette, and the funds to finance the adventure dried up, so they did not go forward. Also in France, Lauzun was hailed as a hero after his victory in the United States, but sentenced to death by the Revolutionary Tribunal and guillotined December 31st, 1793. So all of this was happening at that time. And probably the last, Charles was convicted in absentia as a traitor to the Spanish king, and a warrant was issued for his arrest and seizure of his property in Louisiana. And then after that, in the War of 1812, Charles de Paul, at age 59, 31 years and 2 days after his part in the Battle of the Hook near Yorktown, was once again on the field in battle in a foreign land at the Battle of Thames. So he went as part of the militia for that.
Sorry, I got ahead of myself. I can't wait to hear about his descendants. You got quite a family that you figured out.
Well, one grandson was Washington Charles de Paul, and he amassed a fortune by investing in ventures such as grain, steel, and glass during the American Civil War, and government supplies. At one time, he was considered the wealthiest man in Indiana. He was a large contributor to Asbury College, and they changed the name to DePaul University today. So he began that. Charles DePaul's grandson, William Gabbard, who's on the left, was a noted Confederate guerrilla in Vernon County, Missouri. William Gabbard and his wife, Rebecca Gabbard, are my great-great-great-grandparents. And on the right is a small piece of a mural, but in Nevada, it covers the whole side of a building. And that was from the 150th, I don't know if it was a celebration, but a recognition of the battle, the burning of Nevada, Missouri, and then the battle at my family's farm. As at the family farm, in May of 1863, Captain Morton, he was a federal militiaman, took about 100 men, and he's there, and they're ambushing the family down there, who are most of my great-great-grandfather's guerrillas are laying out in the yard resting. They just got home from burning houses over in Cedar County. And Morton says, they are doubtless at Old Bill Gabbard's, for that is a noted guerrilla rendezvous, and Old Bill and his boys have been bushwhackers since the day the war broke out. They have been on a raid into Cedar County, boys. God knows what they have done. Let us leave none of them alive. The federal militia burned the Gabbard home, killed 7 of his men, and William escaped on bareback horse so he could continue the fight against the Federals. The federal militia returned home to find their houses burnt. Martha Emmeline Gabbard, my great-great-grandmother, was 11 years old when they burned her house. The Gabbard girls had to care for the guerrilla dead and bury them after the battle in the cemetery. In this slide, guerrilla warfare was a family affair. William's oldest sons, John and Peter, were involved in Gabbard's guerrilla command of about 25 men. Both of them were killed during the war. Every member of the Gabbard family was a staunch Confederate. The girls were known as Lady Bushwhackers and served spies, couriers, and smuggled ammunition and scouts, and then negotiated with the Federals for prisoners. And on here was a new stone that was set probably, 10 years ago when they ran across her grave in the cemetery. The picture in the center is a copy of the original picture from a cousin of mine. And of course, everybody that writes a book about the Bushwhacker Bills of Missouri want to use her pictures. So. Okay, next, please. And here we have This is the tomb where Charles is buried in Salem, Indiana. And Napoleon Bonaparte, DePaul, his son, created the tomb for his father. In 1794, the Spanish authorities banished DePaul from territory and seized some of his business property there because of ongoing intrigues. After France had acquired the Louisiana Territory in 1800, the Americans had completed the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. DePaul was free to resume tending to his business interests in Louisiana. Charles DePaul is reported to have led a wagon train to Kentucky's settlers, Louisiana, which had recently become a U.S. territory, open for settlement. Charles dies down there. Some say he fell off his horse. I'm not sure about that. And was buried in Crown Hill Cemetery. The Revolutionary War stone that we see there was put up maybe 2010 or 11. And unfortunately, it says he was in the Continental Line, which wasn't true. He was with Lauzun's Legion, and then this is the inscription of what's on his tomb. And we don't believe he had a connection to Lafayette, even though it says that he did. Next, please.
All right, this is my favorite. Here we got some future hussars.
These are guerrillas here. This is a picture of my sister and myself mounted on a horse when I was probably around 4 years old. Our ancestors' horses were critical to their success, and so we were introduced to horses early in life. And Charles DePaul and his descendants would not be ruled by lesser men. He was one of my favorite ancestors and a successful man of his time in his new nation.
Thank you very much, Bob. We appreciate all the research that you have done, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
So now we're going to go to Dr. Selig and cover the travels of Lauzun's Legion once they got to the United States. And what's interesting is my commander of the 90th, Dillon's Irish in service of King Louis XVI, actually was confined to quarters on the voyage across the Atlantic because he had 2 saber wounds that he had acquired in a duel. What other insights can you give us about my commander and then the rest of Lauzun's Legion as they make their way across the Atlantic to Newport, Rhode Island, then down to Virginia and back? Bob.
Well, thank you, Colonel. Robert Dillon here, who was a lieutenant colonel of Lauzun's Legion, and here you see a lieutenant colonel of the Legion in the dress uniform, is one of the more colorful characters in a whole group of colorful characters in this in Lauzun's Legion. The only reason why he gets this position is because of his friendship with the Duc de Lauzun, who apparently had an affair with an aunt of his, but that's neither here nor there. What Dillon is most famous for, besides his affairs, is his duels, and there's a number of duels that he's involved in. Sometimes we don't even know why. He becomes the commanding officer of Lauzun's Legion once it's back in Europe, but his career is cut short in Lauzun's Legion because he doesn't speak German, as a inspection report says, and apparently the hussars would not respond to French or Hungarian commands. But be that as it may, the transatlantic journey was relatively uneventful, and the Lauzun's Legion did fairly well on there as far as deaths are concerned. There's only about, I think, 10 men who died during the transatlantic crossing. The big losses come then once they are in the United States, in Newport, for example. So that eventually, by the time they go into winter quarters in Lebanon or in Connecticut, we've had 18 dead and a number of desertions from Lauzun's Legion. Now, one of the reasons why Lauzun's Legion is sent over to Lebanon, Connecticut, for winter quarters is because they have horses, and in Newport, Rhode Island, which had suffered greatly during British occupation, there's very little food grazing left. You know, Rochambeau has to fix the houses for his soldiers, etc. So they send them to a little town of Lebanon, Connecticut, which, if you ever have an opportunity, it's a wonderful place to see on the town green. And there they are, as the Duc de Lauzun says, you know, something that resembles Siberia, which it probably does in the cold Connecticut winters, with the result, of course, that Lauzun, Dillon, and every officer above the rank of captain who can get out of Lebanon does very quickly. And Dillon, as a matter of fact, travels all the way down to Yorktown in the spring of 1781, only to come back to Newport and march down to Yorktown again and back up to Boston. So these are thousands of miles that they are covering over here. You know, if the transatlantic crossing is uneventful, winter quarters are much more eventful, mostly because, as we know, when the cat's out of the house, the mice are dancing on the table. There doesn't take very long before the first tensions with the local population, which are probably unavoidable anyway when you have hundreds of foreign troops in a small community, that there will be civilian military issues and tensions. So that when the Legion finally gets orders to march out of Lebanon in June of 1781, Mrs. Williams, who's married to William Williams, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, whose house is still standing, writes to her brother that, oh, how glad and how thankful I shall be when they're gone forever, for never was I so sick of any people in my life. Part of this frustration, I think, is because Dillon is looking for another servant, and apparently he tries to recruit the family servant. But it's not as if he doesn't have any. We know that at a slave auction in Newport, where slaves from Virginia and Maryland that French Navy had picked up in March are auctioned off, Dillon purchases a young man, a woman, and a child. The young man's name is Madras, which points to an Indian subcontinent background. And we know that Madras goes all the way to Yorktown with him. But then on the way back to France, apparently he purchases another slave, a baptized slave by the name of Emmanuel, whom he takes back to France with him. So it's a very colorful character whom we have here, that is in command of Lauzun's Legion as they make their way down to Yorktown.
The slide seems to have frozen, Bob. Sorry.
Okay, well, on the way down to Yorktown, we continue. I think we wanted to show a slide of the East Coast here from Boston all the way down to Yorktown. If we were to break down the different routes or different roads that the troops took, we would see that Lauzun's Legion, being cavalry and light troops, usually has a flanking mission going along the coast, between the coast and the main traveling armies, certainly until we get to New York and then down in Virginia again. That has the unintended side effect, of course, but interesting side effect, that the Duc de Lauzun shows up at places where he's not supposed to be based on his itinerary that he gets from Rochambeau. At some point, he shows up on the campus of Yale University, for example, and there's a historic marker right on the middle of campus of Yale. He's not supposed to be there. And so they're marching, making their way down to, here's our slide, down to Yorktown, and this is a very rough graphic. But once they get to Annapolis, Baltimore, Annapolis, the Allied forces are on board of vessels sailing down to Yorktown, and it's actually Lauzun's Legion that's the only combat unit that travels on land to Virginia, and they don't travel to Yorktown as a matter of fact, but they're over in Gloucester Courthouse, because over in Gloucester at that point there's only militia, and both Washington and Rochambeau are afraid that the militia would not be able to withstand an attempt by Cornwallis to break out. And
I'll show that in just a minute, Bob. May I ask you what the mission of Lauzun's Legion on this march that started in Rhode Island and ended up in Virginia? I would,
the mission is,
modern parlance, we would call it a screening mission. Is that close to what they would have understood?
yeah, oh, absolutely. That is what they are doing, together with American Light Infantry, then Scammell on the way through New Jersey to set up a screen from Dobbs Ferry down to Chatham, Springfield, and then up to Trenton, behind which the main armies are marching to Pennsylvania, etc. Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, now I've got you down to Gloucester.
Yeah, and it's actually at Gloucester where the true importance and value of Lauzun's Legion is, because when we talk about the siege of Yorktown, we forget two important things. If you look at this map, Yorktown and the siege ring around Yorktown is only half a circle. There's still the York River and the Chesapeake Bay, which is covered and closed off by de Grosse's navy, the French navy, and you know there's no continental navy in existence at the time. But over in Gloucester, there is a land opening that needs to be closed, and it is Lauzun's Legion together with 800 line infantry that comes from de Grosse's vessels that actually closes this siege ring and makes the attempt, makes any attempt on the part of Cornwallis to break out impossible. And it is during early days of the siege that we have probably the largest cavalry engagement of the whole War of Independence, when on the 3rd of October 1781, Tarleton, together with the Queen's Rangers and Tarleton's Legion, is out on a foraging mission at the same time as General George Whedon, and Choisy are out on a reconnaissance in force, and Tarleton, with close to 300 horses, yeah, I'm tempted to say runs into Lauzun, but they obviously know of each other's presence. You can't hide the noise that hundreds of horses make in the dust over there in Gloucester and through the forest, and eventually the Vorhut, I would say in German, of those two cavalry units run into each other at this engagement, and as Lauzun and Tarleton are galloping towards each other almost, Tarleton writes that the lance of one of his of Lauzun's hussars hits his horse, and Tarleton is unhorsed. Lauzun can't get to him, and of course Tarleton's men then come into a rescue attempt to rescue their commanding officer, and he comes to a huge melee. The site, as a matter of fact, where this took place, Wade Katz and I, part of an ABBP project, just very narrowly defined the site where it was. I did a study on that, which hopefully will be released at some point by the National Park Service. But this painting by Don Troiani, I think, shows it very well what is going on here at the time. But after this engagement is over, this is the last time Tarleton or the British ever tried to break out of the siege ring of Yorktown, and the escape route is really blocked by Lauzun. I'm sure he's turning over in his grave. He doesn't get any of the credit for it because everything is focused over on the other side of the river, over in Yorktown.
Well, he's getting his due tonight.
He's getting his due tonight. I'm sure he's very glad he does not suffer from being too shy. The French have this reputation of being womanizers, and particularly as said about Lauzun's Legion and the Hussars. And as a matter of fact, out in Charlotte Courthouse, way out in the middle of nowhere, I'm tempted to say, in Virginia, where I did some research for this W3R project, I got to do my own research, and the county clerk just said, here's our material, pulled open the drawers, and these 18th century things were still tied together with silk straws. Nobody had opened those in 150 years or longer. And there I found this marriage permit for a chasseur of Lauzun's Legion named Le Pont with a woman here for the 16th of May 1782, but he has to be back. Il sera de retour pour l'appel. In other words, just to be back for evening roll call. That makes for a very short honeymoon. But it is signed by Trontignan, and the family Trontignan still exists, and the Comte Trontignan, whom I knew very well, just passed away a couple of years ago. He was very pleased when he saw this marriage permit. So if Robert Capps' ancestors stayed here and didn't want to go back and bitch about Macron, there are some women who apparently went back to France with French soldiers, but the majority of deserters, of course, stayed over here. The majority, there are more men of Rochambeau's forces who stayed over here than the other way around. And among them, with that I can close then. Among those who did stay behind was a man named Pandua, who was in the Bourbonnois regiment and who was from Madagascar, an enfant de l'amour, a product of love, I guess. So it's a very, once you start digging, you find that that is much more than just poor old white guys who are over here. And now we come to the end.
I wanted you to maybe, before we take some questions, could you just say what happened to the Legion and to the Duke?
Well, when Lauzun's Legion comes back to France, and it's actually the last unit to sail out of from the United States back to Europe, out of Philadelphia in May of 1783. Once it gets to France, it is reorganized into a regular Hussar regiment, the 5th Regiment of Hussars. It survives the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and is only the regiment or its successor is only disbanded, I think in the year 2000 as part as a reduction in force. But they are the unit symbol, logo, identifier was still a sabretache of the Hussars with the coat of arms of the Duc de Lauzun on it. By 2000, obviously, the Duc de Lauzun has long been dead, and he died a natural death, because it's perfectly natural that you die when your head is cut off with the guillotine. Lauzun initially had thrown his lot in with the revolutionaries. He is at the meeting of the États Généraux at Versailles, in the tennis court. He does very well. He's commanding officers of the Army of the Rhine. Is in the suppression of the Volontaires revolt. But once we get into the reign of terror and Robespierre, any nobleman like Duc de Lauzun is obviously suspect, and he is tried and convicted of being an enemy of the people, and then decapitated, executed, make a choice on the 31st of December, 1793. And about 6 months later, his widow now is also executed as well. and thus ends the story of the Duc de Lauzun.
Well, it's a sad ending, but we would like to salute his contribution to our liberty and our freedom tonight. Huzzah.
Gentil.
So now we'll take a few questions. We have one from Terry Mitchell. This may stump the band. So Bob Selig, this is going to cause you to find a distant file. How much is known about the duties of Lauzun's musicians?
How much is known about them?
What do you know?
Very little.
Do we know much about the field music, for example, that Lauzun would have had in his Legion?
No, we don't. The problem there is there are very few primary sources on the Duc de Lauzun. The only one, the biggest, the most important source is that journal by Hugo from that covers the time period from after the siege of Yorktown until the Duc de Lauzun comes back from France and rejoins the Legion up at Yorktown Heights in your neighborhood, Jim. And this is basically and he keeps that journal to justify his activities to the Duke when he comes back. And it's a perfect example for the saying that you only leave traces if you're really, really good or really, really bad. In this case, it's if you're really, really bad. So I could look through my files. The music may be mentioned in there, but I couldn't tell you anything right on top of my head that comes.
All right,
Mine.
so well done, Terry. You stumped the band. Rocky Wagner, I don't know if this is serious or not, but wants to know if the French were required to pay tolls on Plainfield Pike.
Probably not, because Plainfield Pike didn't exist yet as a toll road. But
Right.
I
don't
can
know
tell
why
you
Rocky asked that question.
But I can tell you that I have the ferry bills for the ferry in Philadelphia, for the ferry across the Susquehanna, down at Rogers Tavern in Maryland, Havre de Grace, etc. So, yeah, the French never got away with not paying because, unlike the Continental Army, which paid in a wheelbarrow of IOUs, the French paid in silver and gold. Which, on the other hand, is great for a historian, right? Because you got the receipts, so you know where they were and what it cost them.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So, Bob Capps, do you have any friends who have descendants from Lauzun's Legion, or are you alone there in Missouri?
I have relatives that do, plenty of descendants, but other than me, I'm the only one I know up here in Missouri.
But I know,
Yes, go ahead.
Jim. I do know other descendants of folks who remained behind, both from Lauzun's Legion as well as the Royal Dupont Regiment, the German-speaking regiment, which has well over 100 deserters, mostly in Pennsylvania, obviously, because it's not that hard to disappear in Pennsylvania if you're German in the 18th century. So I do know that there are other descendants. I know there's a family that's out actually near Charlotte Courthouse. I think when Lauzun's Legion left, they must have hid in a haystack, and as soon as the Legion was gone, they came out again and found themselves a wife and stayed there within a couple of miles only.
Yeah, so I alluded to the fact that I had a relative, a captain of Hessians who deserted and formed the Lutheran Church in Oglethorpe, Georgia. So these people made it all the way down, even to places like Louisiana, first Kentucky, Louisiana, Georgia. And I guess we owe Pennsylvania Dutch, to these deserters who stayed behind, maybe some of whom came from your regiment, the Royal Dupont, Bob. I have one question here from Rob Haberman. He wants to know how many members of the Legion would you guess remained in the U.S. after the war, since we're on this deserter theme. Any idea?
How many we're talking? Well, you have to break this down. In the fall of 70.
Connecticut. He's interested in Connecticut.
Lebanon. He lives in Connecticut. Not too many. though again, if we have to break this down, in the fall of 1780, Rochambeau started to recruit in the United States to fill up losses through earlier desertions or on the transatlantic crossing. And the only group of people where he could really recruit, because Americans were off limits, was Haitian Brunswick deserters from British Army. And there's a recruiting station in Philadelphia. There's a recruiting station in Baltimore. The problem is that these men who already had been deserters or prisoners of war signed up, and many of them never even made it to Connecticut, deserted along the way, or deserted in whole groups. So these are not men who actually came from Europe, but they did desert over here in the United States. I don't have the number on top of my head now, but we're talking 50, 60, maybe. I have the numbers in the book that I wrote about Hussars in Lebanon, about the winter quarters in Lebanon, Connecticut, where there's a breakdown there of the exact numbers. Rob Capps is just showing it right now.
I told you up front that Bob Selig is in Royal DuPont. You can see that there was a question about your uniform. You can see these very interesting balls that are on our hats. So we really are a smart looking lot. Lance Ashworth wants to know if Tarleton was involved with the race for the Dan that preceded the battle at Yorktown. Bob Selig, got any idea?
Well, which side is Lance talking about? He's talking about the American side or the British side?
He wants to know about
Both
Tarleton.
are racing to the Dan, aren't they?
Yeah, he wants to know if Tarleton was involved.
Yeah. Tarleton was involved. I mean, he comes up with Cornwallis, and just like Cornwallis, when they get to the Dan, they find all the boats gone. Of course, Greene had pulled them over onto the other side of the river, so Cornwallis couldn't, and that's how Greene got away from Cornwallis in the spring of 1781. And then Cornwallis marches up into Virginia and ends up in Yorktown eventually.
Okay, Julie wants to know, how did Lauzun's Legion get their horses? Because we know they did not transport them across the Atlantic.
Well, they had to purchase them, obviously, and most of the horses that eventually end up with Lauzun's Legion or in the French army are purchased in Pennsylvania and are driven up to Rhode Island for Lauzun's Legion and for other purposes like pulling wagons and horses and artillery pieces mostly. So they come from Maryland, and at some point, certainly early on, it's a buyer's market. And then when French forces sail out of Boston, or Lauzun's Legion out of Philadelphia in 1780, December 1781 or summer of 1782, it's obviously a buyer's market because everybody knows the Hussars can't take their horses with them, or the French officers can't take their horses with them. And so we have accounts that on the quays of Boston in December 1781, there are the horses saddled, everything that used to belong to French officers, and the Americans, good Yankees, are just waiting for the ships for the officers to be on the ships and they get the horses for free.
Well, okay. So Bob Capps, you were riding a horse there in one of those pictures. Do you think that that tradition of being a hussar was carried through to your family down to today?
Well, they seem to be pretty good. My great-great-grandfather, William Gabbard, that we seen in the one slide, was certainly a great horseman and in his exploits, in his battles that he fought in. So I would assume that that's something that may be passed down. I also found pictures of my children, and I think of one of my granddaughter riding horses. I used to have horses also.
Excellent. Ralph Nelson wanted to add a comment here that a doctor with the Legion remained behind in Wilmington, Delaware, and was the founder of the medical society there. I see you shaking your head, Bob Selig. You know this guy.
Ralph Nelson? Oh, yeah, I know Ralph.
No, the doctor.
Yeah. Dr. Capelli's, his tombstone is in Wilmington, in the cemetery. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to, those were the questions that I saw. If we missed any, perhaps we can pull those together and we can send some answers out through W3R. Ellen might be able to make that happen. The last thing I wanted you to know is if you want to read about the history of the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route National Historic Trail, I did an article in the Hudson River Valley Review, which you can see online. You can see the website down at the bottom, www.hudsonrivervalley.org. We have digitized all of our articles to help people through the COVID crisis if they need things to read. We'd also like you to subscribe. So if you'd like to subscribe, we'll have another issue coming from the press next week, and then we will be distributing them. You can sign up for that at the same website. I think that's it for us, Larry. Over to you, sir.
Okay, I'm sure that all of you join me in thanking this wonderful group of panelists and historians, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Selig, Robert Capps, for a fascinating program and a story that we probably would find hard to find someplace in the history books. So I hope you will join me in a round of virtual applause because I'm sure it would be very resounding if that could take place. And I'd also like to say special thanks to those behind the scenes that were involved in this program, and that would be Julie Dodell and Ellen von Karajan, and actually Mike Boone, who was IT. They have been involved with us throughout the program and probably deserve our condolences for dealing with a group of unruly historians as we have put this program together and many intriguing little events to try to overcome as this has taken place. So I hope that you will join me and again and saying goodbye to these people. We hope you will come back again for future programs. We hope you've enjoyed it. There is at the conclusion of this a poll to take on what has taken place, and I hope you'll fill that out. And you're always welcome to contact either Ellen von Karajan or myself and give us your thoughts and ideas. And hopefully we'll see you again on a future program.
Larry, if we might give a cheer here as we're sorting out elections here in America. Vive le roi, vive le roi, vive le roi to the King of France. And hip hip huzzah, hip hip huzzah, hip hip huzzah. Sir, over to you. I think we're done.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was great.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening.
I need another